Okay, welcome everybody then. It's nice to have you here with us today. So this is the second part of your two-part webinar series with Dr. Cath Arnold. I'll turn my camera off in a moment because I know at the minute you can see Cath twice, so I'll turn my camera off when we get started. But just the same, for those of you that did come last time, there's plenty of time for questions as we work through the session, and we'll have more time at the end for questions as well. So if you have got anything that you wanted to ask, please do. Often it can be the way that people are a little bit nervous about asking that first question, but Cath is really open to have people coming forward and asking questions, and it helps us to kind of learn and think of those things. So you can either wait to the end and ask us, or pop it in the chat, and we can do that as we're going through, or when you've got the opportunity, just give us a shout out and we'll answer your questions. We're expected to be finished by 6:30, so that you can enjoy the rest of your evening. But yeah, it's nice to have you with us. I'll turn my camera off and then I'll pass over to you.
Okay, thanks, Cath. It's Cat and Cath tonight. Yeah. Okay, so this session is called Understanding Schemas and Emotion in Early Childhood, which began with my grandson Harry, who you can see on the first slide, using pegs to connect. This was Harry and me. He came to nursery in 1996 when he was 3. And it was shortly after his parents had separated. And I didn't click at the time, but he was doing a lot of connecting. And I suppose making that link has helped me. I finished this study 17 years ago, and I wrote a book about it 14 years ago. So this is the book, and I'm going to read some passages from the book. And there's a lot more information in the book, but obviously, in this presentation, I can only tell you some of what happened. And there's also some personal stuff in here that I've reflected on. So I'm giving you an emotional health warning, because studying children's emotions can bring up emotions in us, which I'm sure you all know, but sometimes it's a bit unexpected. So just be aware that, we're going to be talking emotions and thinking about children, probably children that you work with as well as children I've worked with. So the session this evening has 3 parts. I'm going to tell you what led to my investigation of schemas and emotion, what I found out, and what further reflections revealed to me. So Harry, my grandson, was one of the many children who prompted us to think about the emotional significance of his actions. I first heard about schemas, or repeated patterns of action, when I came to work here in 1988, having worked in the early years for 12 years. I hadn't really heard, I suppose I'd heard the term schemas, but I didn't know what it meant. And as soon as we started talking about the patterns that children explore, it just made sense to me. And I've been observing and trying to understand children's repeated actions ever since. I very much feel that I learn from children. And at first, I studied Chris Athey's work with a focus on cognitive development, which was Chris's focus. She deliberately chose not to look at emotions, but she was still alive when this study was complete, and she did give me some really positive feedback about it. So I was quite pleased, because she was my guru as far as schemas are concerned. So going back, these are the earlier studies that I did. In 1990, I was doing a diploma, and I looked at our children who play together, exploring similar schemas. And this was a study of 9 children, 9 nursery children, and their parents observed them at home. The workers observed them in nursery, including me. And that was my first study. It was about 7,500 words, I think. And then in 1997, for my master's in education, I did a study of 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. and that's called Building on Home Learning at Nursery. So again, very much working with the parents studying the children at home, us studying the children in nursery. And we used quite a lot of video as well in that study. And I came up with this kind of theoretical framework. I called it the AIRS framework, whereby I looked at autonomy, involvement, relationships, schemas, and strategies. So by then, we were looking at Ferralava's work on involvement and well-being. So by the end of that study, I was developing an interest in schemas and emotions, mostly prompted by conversations with the parents and observations we'd made. So a finding from the Masters in Education was that strong schemas indicate emotional states. So Lindsay enclosed her space all the time. She was one of 5 children, and she seemed to need to create a space in nursery for her play. Christopher broke through the boundary. He was the youngest of 3 children whose parents fostered children. So there was lots of coming and going, and it almost seemed to mirror what was happening in the family. Georgia, who's my eldest granddaughter, enveloped her head in a hat when she was emotionally needy. So she seemed to need that cover, you know, and I think a lot of us do need that. Michael stood on top when he felt on top. So he would go right to the top of the climbing frame and look around at everyone, and that when he was feeling emotionally well. So I would like to start with you. I'd like you to reflect for a couple of minutes on what you do for comfort when you're feeling anxious or upset, or when you have to cope with a major change. Just journal or share with someone you trust. I'll just leave it for 1 or 2 minutes. Give you a chance to do that.
It's 2.5 minutes.
Okay, does that feel long enough?
Yeah, some nods.
Feel okay? I'm not asking you to share anything, because obviously that's very personal. I did use journaling a lot during this study. I kept a journal the whole time, and in the study, I've written bits from my journal. It was very, very useful. Okay. So the PhD study that I completed in 2007, I'd like to acknowledge the whole nursery team and the data that we collected, because there were 27 children in total involved, 8 that I focused on, including Harry, but I'd already written about Harry, but obviously, and their families who cooperated with us to carry out this study. It was important that I knew the families already, I think, because it took quite a lot of trust. And our focus for the whole study was well-being and resilience. So my colleagues in the nursery and the research team were absolutely amazing. We had some great discussions, and the families, some of whom I visited at home, it depended on the situation, but a lot of them I did visit at home to talk through the observations and things. My own family were very supportive. My husband gave up work so he could be a house husband. And for 6 years, he did everything at home: shopping, cleaning, washing, cooking, everything, so that I could do a big study like this and go to work full time. So my daughters proofread. My son was always there to talk to about things that I was concerned about or memories that I had. So I think I needed all that support. And obviously I had a supervisor as well. Professor Christine Pascal was my main supervisor. And then I had other advisors like Chris Athy, Colwyn Travath, and Julia Former Senior, who are all very, very able in the academic world. So also the giants whose work we have built on. So those giants, I think, are from the literature for me. So for schematic theory, Obviously, Piaget was the original source, but Chris Athey translated that work for me. And I knew her personally, so I had a lot of really good conversations with her. I also used attachment theory. I used schema theory and attachment theory as my theories when I looked at the data. I also found Winnicott's work on transitional phenomena really useful, and it's quite an easy read. Compared to Piaget, you know, you can understand it at the first read. Susan Isaacs, who ran her school 100 years ago, her work was just absolutely amazing, and I loved it, and I always liked her work. So she wrote a book about the social development of children and also the cognitive development. And then Janet Shaw, who you may not have heard of, she did her PhD on emotions and cognition, but she was more interested in the parents, whereas I was interested in the children. And again, I know Janet Shaw personally. She was a teacher at the time she did her study in 91, but then became head of the Northern School of Psychotherapy. So she did move into this kind of area. Okay. So this was how it started. So during the late 1990s, I had a cognitive and emotional jar. My grandson Harry, when he was 3, was exploring a connecting pattern around the time his parents separated. But I was completely resistant to seeing that as anything but a cognitive act. I'm going to read a bit from this book that I've just recommended to you because I wrote this a long time ago. Some 4 years after filming Harry as a 3-year-old connecting with string, I showed a video sequence to a group of MA students. The session was about Piaget's work, and a colleague was going to talk about the work of Winnicott afterwards. My daughter, Harry's mother, had joined the group because of an interest in the theory, although she wasn't studying at the time. I can only describe myself as frozen emotionally when my colleague, in his talk about Winnicott, referred back to the video sequence I'd just shown of Harry and introduced the group to a paper written by Winnicott in 1960 on the subject of string, a technique of communication. In this paper, Winnicott referred to a boy aged 7 who was obsessed with everything to do with string. As well as connecting bits of furniture together with string, in a similar way to what we just observed Harry doing, the boy's parents were worried that he'd recently tied a string around his sister's neck. The link between connecting with string and this boy's anxiety seemed rather extreme and created an emotional jar for me and for others in the group. There was one person that ran out crying because her own child was doing this and she'd recently separated. However, on reflection, I could begin to see that there was a link between Harry's strong desire to connect and his emotional world at that time. So I'd like you to have another think. What can you do with string? Just jot down some ideas. I'll just give you about a minute. Jot down some ideas about string. Making a coil, yeah. Washing line. Let the children do some pretend washing, yeah. Measure, connect. Cat's cradle, yeah. Yeah, great ideas. Wrap around objects, yeah, that's very similar to what Winnicott says. Time between the table legs, yeah.
Yeah, cutting it as well.
Yeah. And I showed a bit last week of Harry tying string in our kitchen between all the cupboards, yeah. That's great. Thank you, everybody. So this is a quote from Winnicott on string. He said, string can be looked upon as an extension of all other techniques of communication. String joins, just as it also helps in the wrapping up of objects and in the holding of unintegrated material. So we're talking emotions now, aren't we? In this respect, string has a symbolic meaning for everyone. I didn't start off thinking I will study schemas and emotion. I was quite lost at first. And I actually had a conversation with Professor Julia Formasino. She was visiting here, and I was looking at well-being, but I was trying to stay away from schemas. And she just, in 10 minutes, said to me, well, what have you been studying up to now? And obviously I'd been studying schemas for years. She said, well, you shouldn't really be moving away from that just because this has got to be about well-being. So within that 10 minutes, I realised the link, really. So it took quite a while for me to get to that stage, I must admit. I'm making it sound like I just thought of it, but it wasn't that easy. I then began to look at other researchers and whether they'd looked at the meaning of actions and symbolic play and whether it had an emotional meaning. So Susan Isaacs has an observation of a child placing two bricks together, touching, when he's anxious about his mother coming back. So again, a very small act can be significant. And this is an observation from Chris Athy's book, which I was always familiar with. Lois drew her brother and covered the whole drawing and said, I've covered him up with a blanket. And then she added, and I'll put the cot in a cupboard and I'll put the cupboard in a cave. So what would you make of that? What would you think was going on for that child?
Do you want the comments in there?
Yeah, comments if you've got any to offer.
Struggle to accept a new sibling.
Yeah, exactly what I thought. Yeah, Georgina, yeah. Yes, the brother was quite a new baby, I think. I mean, Chris chose just to see this as enveloping because she didn't actually want to go to the emotions. But I think she was aware that, this was possibly the reason. Yeah. That's great. Thank you. Just somebody else joining, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it looks like somebody had an issue because they've left and come back again. Yeah. So I think we're okay. Yeah.
Janet Shaw said, recognition of the child's schemas appears to give the parent and teacher access to the child's emotional experience in addition to her intellectual development. So Janet Shaw was already saying that before I began this study. Okay, so for the whole big study of 27 children, we decided to begin our study of well-being and resilience by filming children and their families with their permission when separating and being reunited, not to categorize them in any way, as in other studies, but to learn from the children and their families how they negotiated the separation. So I'm going to show you two case studies that came from the study. Of two different separations, and I will ask you to think about each one. At this point, I'm using pseudonyms, which I do in this book as well, because I think it's sensitive. And if you think about it, these children are now over 20, around 20 years old or a bit older. So I don't really identify them in case it's a bit sensitive, which it often is. The first case study is an example of, I'll call him Edward. He was 2 years and 9 months at the beginning of the study, but we'd known him for 2 years because his older sisters came to the nursery. He had a very strong and enduring interest in connecting and disconnecting, but he struggled to separate from his mum each day, and he was interested in phones. So I'm going to read from the book, The Separation, but this you can see some illustrations of it on the screen. This was Edward's separation. Edward was filmed coming into the building, looking anxious, frowning, and staying very close to his mum, pressing his body against her legs. When it came to the actual separation, his mum Janet too looked anxious and left after telling him she had to go and saying a quick goodbye. Edward became very distressed. He ran after his mum, and when he realised she'd gone, he lay down on the floor near the exit and cried. His family worker stroked his back, but he wriggled away from her and wouldn't allow her to comfort him at first. She stayed nearby, so I'd just like you to think about what would he be feeling and what would his mum be feeling and what could we do to support her and what could we do to support him? And then I'll tell you what happened next. Give you a couple of minutes again, just to think. I'm sure you've had this experience with other children. So although I'm not actually showing the video, I think you'll be able to identify with it if you work in a nursery or with young children.
Jess has wrote, if hugs are needed, and I sometimes wonder who are the hugs for.
Yes.
Is it for mum or for Edward?
Yeah,
sometimes
absolutely.
I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Doesn't know who he can trust.
Yeah.
There's another comment here.
Yeah. Guilt for mum, yeah. Fear.
Yeah, fear, guilt.
Yeah. It's very tricky, isn't it?
Very thoughtful answers.
Yeah.
Yeah, share annoyed perhaps. Yeah.
Okay, I'll tell you what happened next. Annette tried to engage Edward by offering him choices. Did he want to go outside or on the computer? He shook his head, but then he pointed at the hook hanging undone at the top of the men's toilet door. Annette carried him near to it. He fastened the hook. She pointed to the bathroom door, which had a similar hook and eye. She carried him close to it. He unhooked it and then fastened it and smiled. Annette looked around and said, Trevor's office. The hook was undone. Edward did it up and smiled again. She carried him into the main nursery room and said, I think Maureen, our cleaner, might have one. So she carried him to the laundry room door. He unhooked the hook, fastened it, unhooked it and fastened it again, smiling. So this is, I think, going with what he wanted to do was the right thing to do. And she had to stay near him till his anger subsided a bit. But, you know, that continued for years, even into school, because I remember going across the road. He went to the school across the road. And I remember going across to get a permission off his mother to show the actual video. And she said he's still finding it difficult, you know, to separate, for a very long time. So it was one of those things. Okay, now I've got a second case study. This is Ewan. And again, I'll read the actual observation. Wait a minute, it's here. So he was 2 years, 10 months. This is Ewan with the blonde hair. His brother is at school, but he's come to drop him off at nursery. Ewan came into the nursery with his mum and his older brother. He settled at the marble run with his family worker. He knelt on the floor facing her. The marble run was between them. Ewan seemed very engaged with putting marbles in the top of the run and watching them run through to the base of the run. His mother came from behind and rubbed and patted his back, kissed him and told him she needed to go to work. He didn't respond. She seemed a little unsure, but walked slowly towards the door. Seconds passed before he turned round and shouted, Mum! He got up quickly and took Annette's hand and walked to the door, where his mother was waiting. She crouched down facing him and held him and kissed him and then said, Bye-bye. He turned back and walked to the space he had left, looking satisfied and sure of himself. I think there's another lot of, this is them going to the door and you can see his mum hugging him. And so just think about what's different about this separation and how can we support him to do what he needs to do. And how does he feel when he suddenly realises his mum's gone? It's only 2 years, 10 months. That's very young. And how does his mum feel? Just have a little think. Thanks, Cath. I'll just read the next bit, which is the discussion and interpretation of Ewan's actions, but I think you've got it anyway. When we discussed this observation, both his mother and his family worker said it was important for Ewan to carry out his goodbye ritual, which included going to the door and seeing his mother or father go. He also developed over time a bedtime ritual, which included his mother saying, "Night, night, sweet dreams, see you in the morning." His mother had to say these words in the same order each night, or he would get up and shout down to her to repeat the words correctly. So it's definitely within his power, I think. And I think he feels, he's got autonomy. So what, you might not think that repeated play links with this, but later that morning, he built a perfectly symmetrical building with maple blocks. And he went on to place 7 large cylindrical blocks in a line, closely connected to each other on top of the building. He often placed objects in lines, and we wondered whether he was exploring time through space, and also that ritual idea where one thing comes after another thing comes after another thing. It's a bit like a timeline, isn't it? Or a visual timetable, which cropped up last week. So maybe that was his way of trying to understand. I've got a nice picture of him now. He came back at 11 and a half to nursery and reflected on his experiences. And he said Annette, his family worker, was one of the most important people in his life at that time, which was lovely to get that feedback. I have to say, he's a lot older now. I met him one day when I was going for a bike ride in the woods near us, because he lives quite near me, and he was starting his master's study. So it's lovely to think you have that follow-up, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to give you a little bit of information about one of the other children. In the book, there are case studies. Each chapter is a case study. But this was a little girl called Sam. And I studied the children over a period of 18 months and obviously met with the parents and workers. So I visited the nursery and made video and narrative observations of each child regularly. I then used schemas and attachment theory to try to understand any emotional themes. I shared all the observations with the parents and workers. Sam's language was well developed. So this gave us a lot more clues about what she was working on. She was into enveloping, containing, and seriation. She liked playing with families of animals, where there was a mother, father, and child, or, that kind of thing. She would bury animals in the sand, cover dinosaurs with wet spaghetti, cover animals with lentils. And on the next slide, I'm going to show you some of her, some of the talk between her and a friend. Now, on this occasion, Sam didn't say pretend Dad died, but she had said that previously. Her friend Diane said, pretend Dad died and Mummy didn't die. Sam said, pretend Mummy was having a bath. She was covering her bear with lentils. And then she said, pretend Dad was sleeping in his nice warm bed. And then pretend Daddy's gone. Pretend Daddy's gone to jail, as she placed her bear inside a hollow block near her on the floor. So these themes were repeated. Towards the end of the year, Sam's mother shared that Sam was obsessed with death. Also, Sam's parents separated towards the end of the study period. So we wondered, was Sam exploring separation and loss through enveloping? So making things disappear and then reappear. So moving on to the second part of the talk now, which is what I found out. So my hunch was that perhaps certain repeated patterns or schemas were prompted by emotional events. I mean, sometimes when I do this kind of talk, people automatically think that anyone whose parents separate are going to be connecting or enveloping, but they might not. It might be a different pattern that they use to understand. So during the study of 8 children, I found that schemas were not prompted by events. Chris Athy said they were internal, and I think I would stick with that. But there did seem to be close links between the exploration of particular schemas and understanding emotional events. My main finding, sorry, was that another?
No, it's fine.
Okay. My main finding was that each child seemed to use their repertoire of schemas for comfort, to give form to, and to explore and begin to understand complex life events and changes. So they might be just trying to understand what's going on, why has this happened? And of course, I was still struggling at that stage to explain what was slightly out of my reach. Their actions seemed to relate in some way to what they were trying to understand, but also to their earlier actions. For example, in the study, having objects and transporting those objects seemed to relate to feeling of value. Enveloping and revealing seemed to relate to absence and presence of a temporary or permanent nature. So I began to look at the literature, and I came across, which I had heard of, but I hadn't really looked very closely at it, reflective abstraction, which was a concept introduced by Piaget. So he said that when certain connections are drawn out of the sensory motor schemata and projected upon the new plane of thought, this is how learning happens, or one of the ways in which learning happens. I was searching for a succinct way to express what I was finding out. And also, because it was a PhD, there had to be something unique. There had to be a new concept I was introducing that people could build on. So I came up with the idea of reflective expansion, which was slightly different to abstraction. So with abstraction, you're taking it from and putting it on a higher plane, whereas with expansion, you're leaning back to try and understand something through some of the patterns that you explore. So just to explain that, on the left, I've got the concept of reflective abstraction. So children carry out repeated actions at a sensory motor level in their actions. They then take these actions forward into their representation and thinking, so they become symbolic. And then increased understanding occurs when the child is developmentally ready within the cognitive domain. And then on the other side of that, children are faced with complex, abstract concepts beyond their current level of development in the emotional domain. Children seem to reach back, explore earlier repeated patterns to try and make links with aspects of that abstract concept. And eventually, hopefully, they come to some increased understanding within the emotional domain. Now, I've applied this to Edward, who we've just looked at. So Edward on the left, now he was connecting all the time. He loved, we even had a Hoover in that he took to bits and put back together. So, it was a strong pattern of behavior. Edward explored disconnecting and connecting with various bits of technology. He practiced taking objects apart and trying to put them back together. He began to understand how to fit parts of objects together to make a whole object, and that parts can make up a whole. That's in the cognitive domain. And then in the emotional domain, Edward was faced with a very painful separation from his mother when he started attending nursery. He reached back to explore together and apart through putting hooks through the boundary of eyes repeatedly. Eventually, he began to understand that he could be with his mum or apart from his mum, and that she would come back for him. I'm not saying he was completely happy with the situation, but he was exploring it and trying to understand at least. And it gave him some comfort because we saw from his body language. Okay, I'm going to give you a minute or two just to think about that and see if it makes any sense. I mean, it took me 6 years to come up with this, so I'm not expecting you to completely get it in 2 minutes, but just be nice to have a little reflect.
And I guess if people have got any questions or anything they need to hear again, they can just pop that in the chat. And you can...
absolutely. Questions or comments or anything really. All helps. Just give a couple of minutes, Cath.
Yeah.
Or if you just want to speak up, you can speak up if you want. Hopefully you might be feeling a bit comfortable to do that now.
It's always nice, isn't it, when people are brave enough to say...
Well, I would much rather be in the room with
yeah,
people, you know, but it's not always possible, is it?
No.
Yeah. Oh, gosh,
The importance of repeating that action, isn't it?
Yeah. Fascinating.
It's interesting, Nikki, that you've noticed that, because initially you could think, oh, he's really interested in cars and trains, but that you've noticed that actually it's the magnetic.
Yeah, the connecting aspect.
Yeah, it's the connecting aspect of that.
I think in all fairness, at the time I was doing my assignment but we were looking at schemas and with that, so I'll study for it as well. But yeah, it was really fascinating, and he took it as he got more confident and he was able to go out into different parts of the nursery and into the garden. And that became like in a water tray, he would only have boats that he could connect with the anchors together and then take apart. And then when he started to feel more confident to speak, he would say the word mum, mum, and then he would take one away and put it back. So I did my whole study on that, but it was fascinating.
Yeah, brilliant. That
really
sounds fascinating. It really does, yeah. Okay, so moving on. You may think I had schemas and emotions sussed. I completed this study in 2007. I studied for 6 years. For me, however, understanding emotions and the symbolic meaning of children's play is ongoing, and knowing how to respond is another issue. This is a more recent experience. My granddaughter Gabby, when she was 5, my son separated from his wife. He's her dad. I'd looked after their daughter since she was 8 months old, and I was still taking her to school 2 or 3 days a week. That September, it was really hard getting her to school. And one day at our house, she got really upset. I got some yollies in the fridge and I offered her one, and she wanted 2. And I said, well, you can have a second one when you've eaten the first one, you know. But she just started screaming and crying, I want 2 yollies together. And I think her dad had to carry her out to the car. She was so upset. And when I discussed it with Harry's mum, my older daughter, she said, Mum, it wasn't the yollies. She wanted her parents together. And I didn't realise in the moment that, you know, it was probably that. But so we go on, don't we? This is Gabby. I wrote a book about her first 7 years. It's accompanied by 59 video clips online, and there's a lot about transitions and how she learns to deal with them. And it was recently shortlisted for a Nursery World Award as Book of the Year. So I was really chuffed about that. Gabby's 12 now, by the way. I showed her last week banging things, and she's a drummer now.
Yeah, she?
Yeah, she plays the drums.
Wow.
Yeah, it's quite funny. I want a bit of video of her playing the drums so I can. Okay, I'm going to show you another example, and this is from the nursery. I think the fact that we've been doing this work, and the likes of yourself, Nikki, you're realising what might be underneath children's behaviour. Some of our workers are as well. And this is my great-grandson, when he was in the nursery, is at school now. One of the workers, Kerry, made this observation. Ezra, saying goodbye to Mummy was hard this morning. And after working through this together, you then went on to explore the separation further. What you did next amazed me. You became very excited to see the pumpkins and immediately became interested in the small ones. You chose 3 and lined them up next to one another. You became very precise about the way in each one sat. And it became very apparent to me that you were ensuring each one was touching in the same way. I can't read all that. After looking intently at the 3 connected pumpkins, you chose to move one to the other side of the wet area. Can we get rid of that? Oh, yeah, of course you can. Sorry. Oh, we've done something now.
I'm so sorry.
Share screen. You share? No. Cancel. Sorry.
Sorry, where is your PowerPoint? It's there, isn't it? There we go.
Oh, there we are. Okay. This bit's really interesting, I think. You chose to move one to the other side of the wet area. However, whilst doing this, you never took your eyes off the other 2 connected pumpkins you'd left behind. You would then repeatedly walk back and reconnect the 3rd pumpkin to the 2 others. Ezra, you spent a long period of time taking this one away and reconnecting it again. Ezra, I wondered if the pumpkin represented your family and you were using them to explore the separations and transitions that take place in your life. That's okay, I've read it now. So that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? I'm moving on to the 3rd part now. Now, these are my reflections. So on reflection during the PhD process, I made a connection with a time when I, as a young mother, aged 24, lost my young sister. She died as the result of a car accident, and she was only 17. It seems no coincidence now that I and my mother and my sister's friends got together and talked, and that the healing process was assisted by learning to crochet and by making blankets to put our lives back together after such a great loss. This is my mum with one of the blankets. We made about 4 or 5, I think. And I actually lived in Germany at the time. So my mum used to send wool over and I used to crochet squares and send them back and she would join them all together.
Sorry, thank you. I didn't realise your message. I don't know if you just want to go back to...
Okay, yeah. So my sister died age 17 as the result of a car accident. She was in a coma for 10 days and then died. And my mum, I don't know why she had the idea, because all Angela's friends used to come round to the house and she had this idea of teaching everybody to crochet. And as I say, I lived in Germany, so I was here for a few weeks and then I went back to Germany and we were all crocheting these squares and then my mum was joining them together into blankets. And I had one on my bed till about 5 years ago, so it was a long time ago, 50 odd years ago. And I then reflected on much earlier events when I came to Corby as an 8-year-old with my family from Newcastle. And we left my older brother behind because he was 16 and he didn't want to come. He's still up there, actually. My younger brother, who was 2.5, used to take everything apart. And then he used to try and put them back together. All of my toys were broken. So I've kind of reflected on those experiences that maybe we were doing the same sort of thing. I kind of think of them as emotional metaphors now for what's happening. Okay, so my most recent project was this book, which I wrote with 9 other people. And I did a chapter with a child therapist on schemas and emotional metaphor. It was published in 2022. And then this year, I guest edited the Early Education Journal in the Spring Early Education Journal. I don't know if anyone's seen it. So I, along with a child therapist, Sue Gascoigne, wrote an article on schemas and emotional metaphors with the collaboration of the nursery staff. And Kerry, again, noticed one of the case studies is Indy, who's my great-granddaughter. And she noticed that Indy was wanting to post things, and she was ramming things into envelopes and trying to put them through the post box. And when her grandmother came to pick her up, she realised her mum had been away overnight for work. So making objects disappear and retrieving them seemed to have meaning for Indy. This is her doing a bit of posting. So it goes on, doesn't it? Finally, Susan Isaacs was a teacher and a therapist. She differentiated between the two roles and strongly recommended that children be allowed to play. So she said the value of play with companions, free imaginative play, as well as play leading to ordered skill and knowledge, is enormously supported and confirmed by this deeper study of children's fantasies. This was a study she did. And my word on play is initiated by children. It belongs to them and it encapsulates their world. I think play is important for infant mental health. It's not something that can be imposed by adults or used to help children achieve outcomes decided by adults. Play can help children work out their inner conflicts. So I feel very strongly about that. It's my email address. That's my other books that I've written, apart from Gabby's, and that's the end. So I'm open to questions or comments or anything.
I'm always really interested when you talk about play, because I think in early years we use the word play often, but actually a lot of the time we're talking about adult-led activities.
Really?
We're not talking about play.
I hope not.
Sometimes it can happen, and I think when we think about play, that's when we're thinking about children's play, as opposed to what the adults are expecting children to engage in.
I think we're better in the early years at allowing children to play and trying to follow their interest.
Yeah.
Well, certainly here.
Absolutely here. And in lots of settings as well, I think.
Yeah.
But for some practitioners, if you're in a school setting, that can be a bit trickier.
Yeah,
I think.
absolutely. Yeah.